You settled for a simple farmer. The words sliced through the room, sharp enough to make the clinking of silverware falter. My sister leaned back in her chair, her wine glass raised like a trophy, her smirk daring me to protest. My parents chuckled, shaking their heads as if I had been a silly child who never quite learned her lesson. What would you do if the same people who mocked your marriage came begging at your door? Stay with me, this story will shock you to the very end. I didn't flinch. I didn't let my smile waver. Instead, I folded my napkin carefully, smoothing the creases as though her insult hadn't just burned into my skin. Calm has always been my armor. It gives people the illusion I'm weak, but in truth, it gives me time to think. And tonight, time was the only weapon I needed. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken, buttered rolls, and the faint tang of red wine spilled on a white tablecloth. A clock ticked on the wall, steady, marking each second of their laughter. It was a Saturday evening, 7:15, the hour when shadows began to stretch long across the farmhouse windows. Outside, the crickets had started their chorus, but inside, it was my family's jeers that filled the air. You always aim too low, my mother said, reaching for another piece of bread. She tore it in half like it was nothing. You could have married into money, but no, you chose dirt under his nails and calloused hands. Her words landed heavy. My husband wasn't even there to defend himself. He was in the barn, fixing a tractor that had been sputtering all week. He had left me at this table with the people who had never once respected him, or me. I lifted my water glass, taking a slow sip. The rim was cool, grounding. Sometimes the things you laugh at, I said softly, are the very things that outlast your laughter. They didn't notice the warning in my tone. Or maybe they did but chose to ignore it. My father barked a laugh, leaning back until his chair creaked. Outlast? Don't kid yourself. A farmer can barely outlast winter. His words stung, but only for a moment. Because tucked away in my mind I carried a truth none of them knew yet. A truth I'd been holding close, like an ace hidden until the perfect hand was dealt. I looked down the table at the faces of cousins and neighbors who had gathered for this meal. Some smiled politely, some avoided my eyes, but I caught one or two glances that weren't amused, glances that flickered with discomfort. They'd heard enough to know cruelty when they saw it. My sister leaned closer, her perfume sharp, floral, cloying. Do you know what people say about you at church? She whispered, loud enough for half the table to hear. They say you threw your life away. That you married below your station. The words were meant to humiliate, and for a moment heat crept up my neck. I steadied my hands under the table, curling them into fists where no one could see. But then I thought of the folder in my desk drawer at home. The one filled with papers my family had overlooked, forgotten, or foolishly left in my reach. Receipts, notices, and one letter in particular that carried a weight none of them would want the world to see. That thought steadied me. Even made me smile. I suppose people will say what they like, I answered, my voice calm. But people also change what they say when the wind shifts. Funny how quickly reputations turn. The words landed heavier than I intended because my sister blinked just once and my mother's hand paused midair before she reached for the butter. Small cracks. Not enough to silence them, but enough to remind them I wasn't defenseless. My father cleared his throat and launched into a story about his old business deal, trying to pull the spotlight away from me. But the edges of the table still buzzed with whispers. The laughter had dimmed, replaced by something quieter. Not respect, not yet, but the first seeds of unease. As the meal dragged on, I found myself studying the details that most would overlook. The chipped edge of the serving platter. The wilted centerpiece my sister had clearly thrown together last minute. The way my father's voice caught when he spoke of money, as though he were covering a crack with paint. Something was unraveling here, and I wasn't the only one who could sense it. Pass the salt, my sister said sharply, as if to reassert control. I handed it over without a word. She smiled too brightly. See, you're good for something after all. The table chuckled, a hollow echo of the earlier laughter. My stomach twisted, but I sat straighter. Silence has a way of unsettling people more than shouting ever could. The minutes dragged into hours, and the sun dipped fully beyond the horizon. Shadows swallowed the corners of the room, leaving the overhead light to flicker against the wood-paneled walls. The tick of the clock grew louder as though it too waited for something. Finally, dessert arrived. A pie my mother had bought from the store but tried to pass off as homemade. The crust was too perfect, the filling too glossy. I cut myself a slice and set it down untouched, watching as everyone else ate with forced cheer. That's when my sister leaned across the table again, her fork clinking against her plate. "Tell me, do you ever regret it?" she asked. Her tone was sweet, but her eyes glittered with malice. "Do you ever wish you'd chosen differently? Married better? Had children who could hold their heads high instead of hiding on a farm?" The words landed like a slap. My breath caught, but I forced myself to meet her gaze. Her eyes were daring me to break, to cry, to lash out. But I did none of those things. Instead, I set down my fork, folded my hands neatly in front of me, and said in the calmest voice I could manage, "You'll regret asking me that sooner than you think." The table went still. Forks paused mid-bite. My father frowned, my mother shifted uncomfortably, and for the first time all evening my sister's smirk faltered. I leaned back in my chair, the faint hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. I didn't explain myself. I didn't need to. The weight of my words was enough. And as the clock ticked on, as the laughter died in their throats, I knew I had just planted the first seed of what was to come. When the meal ended and chairs scraped against the floor, my sister lingered behind, blocking my path to the door. Her smirk had returned, but there was tension beneath it now, a tightness around her eyes. "Big words," she whispered, close enough that I could smell the bitterness of her whine. "But words don't change the truth." I smiled, leaning in just enough to let her hear the steel in my voice. "No," I said, "but evidence does." Her eyes widened, confusion flashing before she masked it with another smirk. But it was too late. She had seen something she wasn't meant to, the certainty in me, the quiet edge of a plan already in motion. We stood there, locked in a silent battle, until the front door opened and the cool night air spilled in. And that's where I left it. My sister's smirk trembling, my parents avoiding my eyes, the weight of my words lingering like smoke after a fire. My sister's smirk trembled as I walked past her, the night air slipping cool and sharp against my skin. The front porch light buzzed faintly overhead, moths batting against the glass. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. My words, "but evidence does," still hung in the air behind me like smoke clinging to a room long after the fire is out. I stepped off their porch and into the gravel driveway, the crunch beneath my shoes grounding me. The night smelled of cut grass and faint diesel, the kind that lingered from my husband's tractor. He was still out in the barn, tinkering with bolts and gears the way some men tinker with crossword puzzles. His world was simple, practical, steady. But mine was shifting, a storm quietly rolling closer, and no one at that table even saw it coming. When I slid into the passenger seat of the truck, I let out the breath I'd been holding all evening. My hands trembled as I smoothed my skirt, the cotton soft but wrinkled from sitting too long under the weight of their laughter. I wasn't broken, but I was tired. Tired of the smirks, tired of the whispers, tired of being the easy target at every family gathering. I whispered to myself, "They think they're untouchable." And then quieter still, "We'll see." The first cracks appeared a few weeks later. I was in line at the grocery store, a basket of canned goods on my arm, when I overheard two women whispering by the magazine rack. "Did you hear about the Johnsons? House payments behind. Again." I didn't turn my head, but the words burned into me. My parents' names, the very people who had mocked me for choosing stability over status, were now a topic of hushed gossip. I paid for my groceries, nodding politely to the clerk, my mind buzzing louder than the hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. At home I mentioned it to my husband. He wiped his hands on a rag, oil staining the fabric, his eyes steady as he listened. "They've stretched themselves too thin," he said. "All show, no roots. Sooner or later that kind of tree falls." His words were calm, but they struck something deep inside me. A confirmation. A reminder that while they mocked the dirt under his nails, it was those very hands that kept our world steady. Soon the whispers became louder. I passed by their house one morning and noticed the lawn unkempt, weeds pushing stubbornly through the cracks in the walkway. For a family that prided themselves on appearances, it was a red flag. The shutters hadn't been painted. A window was cracked, tape holding the pieces together. At church I saw my father bow his head longer than usual during the offering. My mother's pearls, once pristine, were dull and unevenly strung, perhaps rest-strung after one broke and couldn't be replaced. My sister still carried herself with that same brittle confidence, but her smile was tighter, her laughter forced. They were slipping. And with every small detail, every minor unraveling, I felt a strange mix of emotions. A part of me wanted to feel sorry for them. They were my family after all. But another part, a deeper, more honest part, felt something close to satisfaction. Not joy, not celebration, but a grim sense of balance finally tipping. The phone call came late one night. I was folding laundry in the living room, the soft hum of the dryer filling the silence when the phone rang. The sound startled me, sharp and urgent against the stillness. I picked it up, pressing the receiver to my ear. "Hello." A pause, then my mother's voice, low and uneven. "It's us." I didn't speak right away. My hands tightened around the receiver, the cord pulling taut. She cleared her throat. We could use a little help. Just until things smooth out." Her voice wavered on the word help. She had never once asked me for help before. Not when I was sick, not when I struggled, not when I moved out with nothing but hand-me-down furniture. To hear that word now felt surreal. "How much is a little?" I asked, my tone even. There was a shuffle, and then my father's voice came on, rough and defensive. "Don't get the wrong idea. We're not desperate. Just a temporary setback. 20,000. That's all." I pressed my hand to my chest, steadying my breath. 20,000. The same amount they had laughed about once when my husband sold a good season's harvest. The amount they said was barely survival money. "Let me think about it," I said quietly, and before they could argue I hung up. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the moonlight spilling through the curtains. My husband's breathing was slow and steady beside me, but my mind churned. I rose quietly, careful not to wake him, and walked barefoot to the small desk in the corner of the room. The wood was cool under my fingers as I slid open the drawer. There was a folder. Inside were the things they had forgotten, the things they thought no one noticed. Late payment slips, tax notices, a careless letter left on the counter months ago that I'd quietly picked up and copied before returning. I had collected them not out of spite at first, but out of habit. A part of me had always known this day would come. I laid the papers out on the desk, the ink smudged in places, the paper curled at the edges. Evidence. Proof. Not enough yet to destroy, but enough to shake. I whispered into the stillness, "You laughed at me. But laughter doesn't pay the bills." In the weeks that followed, the unraveling accelerated. Their car was repossessed. I heard about it from a neighbor who shook her head and muttered something about hard times. The for sale sign appeared in their yard next, though it sat untouched as weeks turned into months. At the diner, I overheard my sister's voice, brittle and sharp, as she argued with someone on the phone. I said, "I'll get it to you. Just give me more time." She slammed the receiver down so hard the waitress flinched. Everywhere I turned, their cracks showed more clearly. And everywhere I went, people began looking at me differently, not with pity anymore, but with something else. Curiosity. Caution. Maybe even respect. One evening I stood on our porch, the sky streaked orange and purple, and I saw my parents' car pull into our drive. They stepped out, their clothes a little more worn, their faces etched with something I had never seen on them before: humility. They walked slowly toward me like people carrying stones too heavy for their backs. My father tried to muster his old authority, but it faltered. My mother's eyes darted nervously. "Just a loan," he said, standing at the foot of my porch. 20,000. We'll pay it back." I looked at them, really looked, and saw the truth. They weren't here to make peace. They weren't here because they valued me. They were here because they had no one else left to turn to. I folded my arms, the wooden railing cool under my fingers. "I told you I'd think about it," I said. "And I have." Their faces brightened with hope for a fleeting second. Then I added, "But I don't think you'll like my answer." The silence stretched, heavy and unrelenting. My father's jaw tightened. My mother's hands twisted together. Behind me in the house, I knew the folder still sat in the desk drawer, waiting. And as I met their eyes in the dimming light, I realized they had no idea how much worse it could get. I watched them retreat down the porch steps, their figures shrinking in the fading light. My father's shoulders hunched, my mother's hand clutching his arm like a lifeline. Gravel crunched under their shoes as they made their way back to the car. They didn't slam the doors this time. They closed them softly, like people trying not to wake a sleeping giant. The truck engine sputtered to life, headlights cutting across my yard, but for once they didn't blind me. I stood there until the glow disappeared down the road, arms folded tight across my chest. Only when the night was silent again did I exhale. But silence has its own way of carrying messages. Inside I knew the folder waited, proof of every misstep, every careless gamble. And though I had refused them, I knew they wouldn't stop. Desperate people rarely do. 2 weeks later the letter arrived. It was slipped under my door in a plain cream envelope, my name written in shaky script I recognized too well. My first instinct was to throw it straight into the fire, but curiosity tugged harder. I opened it at the kitchen table, the morning sun cutting stripes across the wood. The words were polite, almost formal. They wanted me to attend their annual charity gala. My mother called it a family tradition. I nearly laughed at the phrase. Tradition meant warmth, belonging, history. Their dinners had always been about appearances, not family. Still, the invitation had a desperate undertone. It wasn't just about me showing up. It was about them being seen with me. They needed the illusion that everything was fine, that the cracks I'd seen were nothing but shadows. I set the letter down and stared at it for a long time. My hands didn't tremble this time. My heart didn't race. Instead, a slow, steady calm spread through me. They thought this gala would be their stage. They didn't realize it could also be mine. That evening I told my husband. He was sitting at the kitchen counter, boots muddy from the fields, sipping coffee as though it were the sweetest thing he'd ever known. "They want me there," I said, sliding the letter across the counter. He read it, brow furrowing. "Why now?" "Because they're losing ground," I replied. "And they think standing beside me makes them look steadier." He leaned back, rubbing his jaw. "So what will you do?" For a moment I hesitated. My husband had always been my anchor, never one for games or plots. He lived in a world of soil and seasons, where what you planted grew and what you neglected withered. I loved him for that. But tonight I wasn't thinking of crops. "I'll go," I said finally. "But not the way they expect." His eyes searched mine. "Are you sure?" I nodded. "They started this. I'm just letting them finish it in front of everyone." Preparation became its own ritual. I didn't rush. I took my time, pulling the folder from the desk drawer and laying its contents out across the bed. Receipts, notices, letters. Pieces of a puzzle they never thought anyone was putting together. I sifted through them, choosing carefully, setting aside what mattered most. I also made copies. Pages slipped into plain envelopes, each one neat and anonymous. I didn't write names on them, but I didn't need to. The words inside would speak loudly enough. At night, when the house was quiet, I rehearsed what I might say if given the chance. Not a long speech. No, that would be too obvious. Just enough words to plant doubt, to let the documents do the rest. In the mirror I practiced my expression. Calm. Collected. Not angry, not smug. Just steady, the way they had never expected me to be. The day of the gala arrived with a chill in the air. Autumn was creeping in, the trees turning gold and red, their leaves crunching underfoot. I dressed simply but carefully, choosing a dark dress that fit me well but didn't scream for attention. I wasn't going there to blend in, but I also wasn't going to play their game of sparkle and pretense. When I walked into the venue, a rented hall dressed up with twinkling lights and floral arrangements that smelled faintly of desperation, I felt every eye flick toward me. Some widened in surprise, others narrowed in calculation. My mother's face lit up too brightly when she saw me, as though she'd won a prize. "You came," she breathed, kissing my cheek. Her perfume was cloying, masking something sour beneath. "Of course," I said, my voice even. "I wouldn't miss it." She didn't notice the weight of the envelope tucked neatly in my clutch. The night unfolded with practiced choreography. Waiters in pressed shirts glided through the crowd with trays of champagne. Laughter floated in the air, brittle at the edges like glass ready to crack. My father made the rounds, shaking hands, telling stories that no one quite believed anymore. My sister sparkled in a sequin dress, laughing a little too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. I moved quietly among them, smiling politely, speaking when spoken to. People greeted me with surprise, some with curiosity, a few with genuine warmth. I caught whispers trailing behind me. "Isn't that her sister? The one who married the farmer?" I let the words pass over me like wind over water. When dinner was served, I found myself seated at the head table. A deliberate move, I was sure. My parents wanted me visible, proof that they were still connected, still strong. They didn't realize the seat gave me a clearer view of everything. The nervous glances between them, the tight grip of my father's hand on his wine glass, The way my sister's smile faltered every time someone asked about money. The food was rich but tasteless. I pushed it around my plate, more interested in the currents running beneath the laughter. It was all so carefully staged, but even the best stages have cracks if you look closely enough. And I looked. As dessert approached, I felt the weight of the envelopes in my clutch. My pulse quickened, but my hand stayed steady. Timing was everything. This wasn't about rage or spectacle. It was about letting truth walk into the room, uninvited but undeniable. My sister leaned across the table, her voice low but sharp. "Glad you could make it. Try not to embarrass yourself tonight." Her words were meant to sting, but they only steadied me. I turned my head slowly, meeting her eyes, and said with quiet certainty, "I won't. But you might." For the first time all evening she blinked. Just once. But it was enough. Later, as the hall filled with the soft clink of dessert spoons and the hum of conversation, my father tapped his glass to speak. His voice was smooth, practiced, but I noticed the faint tremor beneath it. He spoke of generosity, of tradition, of strength in hard times. I let him finish. Then I set down my fork and tapped my glass. The sound was clear, sharp, cutting through the chatter. Heads turned. The room quieted. My sister froze mid-bite, my mother's hand hovering over her coffee cup. I rose slowly, steadying myself with a hand on the table. The lights glinted off the silverware, the air heavy with anticipation. "I'd like to say a few words," I began, my voice calm, almost gentle. And as I spoke, I slipped my hand into my clutch, feeling the edge of the envelope beneath my fingers. I didn't open it yet. I didn't reveal what was inside. That moment would come, but not tonight. Not yet. Tonight was about planting doubt, just as I had planted fear on that porch weeks ago. I ended my short words with a smile, nothing more. The room clapped politely, confused, uncertain. My parents smiled tightly, though I saw the panic flicker in their eyes. My sister forced a laugh that didn't quite reach her lips. As I sat down, I slid the envelope back into my clutch. Not tonight. But soon. And as I lifted my coffee cup, the bitterness grounding me, I realized they still didn't see it. They thought I was here to help them hold their world together. They had no idea I was the one waiting to pull the thread that would unravel it completely. I set my coffee cup down slowly, the clink of porcelain against saucer carrying farther than I intended. Eyes lingered on me for a moment longer than usual before sliding back to their plates. But the unease I'd planted was already working its way through the room. It was subtle, like a draft sneaking under the door. No one admitted they felt it, yet everyone shifted in their seats. My father cleared his throat, attempting to recover the rhythm of the evening. "Now," he said with a strained smile, "let's raise a glass to family, to tradition, to resilience." Glasses lifted, some with genuine warmth, others with hesitation. My own stayed on the table. No one seemed to notice, but my sister did. Her eyes caught mine, sharp as needles, her smile frozen in place. The dinner ended, but the gala pressed on. Music began to swell from the band in the corner, violins weaving a soft melody over the chatter. Guests rose from their seats and drifted into clusters, wine glasses in hand, conversations bubbling with the effort of maintaining appearances. I remained at the head table watching. My mother busied herself thanking donors, her laughter too high-pitched. My father launched into stories with colleagues, his gestures broad but his eyes flicking nervously toward me every few minutes. And my sister, she circled the room like a predator disguised as prey, laughing too loudly, touching arms, pressing her presence where it wasn't wanted. I noticed the small things. A donor's polite but curt nod. A businessman's distracted glance at his watch. Guests weren't fully engaged, their attention slipping elsewhere. The cracks were widening. I rose and moved slowly through the hall. The lights above glimmered off crystal chandeliers, casting patterns on the polished floor. Waiters carried trays of champagne, their crisp uniforms stiff, their faces expressionless. I slipped one of the plain envelopes into the pocket of a passing waiter, my fingers brushing the fabric like it was nothing more than a tip. "Table 7, I whispered. He nodded, none the wiser, and carried it off. Moments later, I saw the envelope land beside a man in a tailored suit. He opened it absent-mindedly, expecting perhaps a note of thanks. Instead, his brow furrowed. His eyes scanned the page, his lips pressing thin. He leaned toward his wife, showing her the contents. She gasped, covering her mouth before whispering fiercely in his ear. The ripple began. small at first then spreading. By the time I returned to my seat, the room was buzzing, though no one dared raise their voice. I picked up my fork, tapped it once against my plate, and the sound rang clear. Heads turned. "I'm glad we could all be here tonight," I began, my voice calm, measured. "It's not often we come together like this, to share food, laughter, and the truth." The word truth landed with a thud in the silence that followed. I rose slowly, steadying myself on the back of the chair. The weight of the room pressed against me, hundreds of eyes watching, waiting. My heart pounded, but my voice remained steady. For years I've listened at this table. I've endured the jokes, the sneers, the laughter at choices you thought were beneath you. My gaze swept toward my family, catching my sister's frozen smile, my mother's stiff posture, my father's clenched jaw. But choices have consequences. And not all of them are mine. Gasps whispered through the crowd like wind through leaves. My sister shot up from her chair, her sequined dress glittering harshly under the light. "Enough," she snapped, her voice breaking. "This isn't the place for." I raised a hand, quiet but firm. "Isn't it?" The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. The band had stopped playing. Waiters froze mid-step, trays trembling slightly in their hands. The air smelled faintly of wax and wine, but beneath it all was the tang of fear. One by one, more envelopes appeared at tables, waiters delivering them without hesitation. Some guests opened them cautiously, others hungrily. Murmurs spread, faces paling as they read. I didn't need to raise my voice. The words on paper spoke louder than I ever could. My father pushed back his chair so hard it screeched across the floor. "This is nonsense," he barked. His face flushed red, sweat beading on his forehead. "Lies. All lies." But the denial was too late. The room had already shifted. I saw it in their eyes, doubt carving its way through belief, suspicion replacing admiration. A woman near the back raised her voice timidly. "Is this true?" The question hung in the air, unanswered. My father's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came. My mother's hands twisted her napkin until it tore. My sister's eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. I didn't answer either. I didn't need to. I stepped away from the table, the polished floor cool beneath my shoes. The spotlight, unintentional but unmistakable, followed me as if the room itself demanded my next words. "I didn't come here tonight to cause a scene," I said, my tone soft. But I couldn't sit silently while masks covered what lies beneath. Sometimes the truth has to be seen, not just heard. I gestured slightly toward the tables where papers lay scattered, stark against the fine linens. "You wanted me here to strengthen your image," I added, my eyes on my parents. But images crack when the foundation rots. A ripple of agreement ran through the room, murmurs blending with the faint clink of glasses being set down. My sister lunged toward me, her hand gripping my arm. Her nails dug into my sleeve as she hissed, "You'll ruin us. Do you understand? You'll ruin everything." Her desperation didn't sting the way her insults once had. It fueled me. I leaned close enough that only she could hear, and whispered, "You ruined yourselves. I'm just giving the world a front row seat." Her grip faltered, her eyes flashing with something between fury and fear. She let go, stepping back as though burned. Across the room, one of the donors rose from his chair, holding up the paper he'd been reading. His voice carried clearly, "If even half of this is true, it changes everything." The crowd shifted, some nodding, some whispering fiercely. My parents sat frozen, their faces masks cracking at the edges. The evening had slipped from their control. They knew it. I knew it. And so did everyone else in the hall. I returned to my seat, though I didn't touch the dessert in front of me. My appetite was gone, replaced by the steady thrum of adrenaline. Around me, the room pulsed with unease, whispers overlapping like waves crashing against rocks. My father tried once more, his voice brittle. "We've given to this community for decades. You know us. Don't believe these." His words trailed off as eyes turned away, conversations resuming without him. They were no longer listening. As the night wore on, guests began to leave, some with polite excuses, others with barely concealed anger. The music never resumed. The air grew heavy, suffocating as the crowd thinned. When the last guests finally drifted out, my parents sat slumped at the head table, staring at the papers that now littered the floor. My sister clutched her glass, her knuckles white, her face pale. I stood slowly, smoothing my dress. I told you, I said quietly, though the room was empty now but for us. Evidence doesn't lie. None of them answered. As I walked out into the cool night air, the silence of the hall followed me like a shadow. The stars above were sharp, cold pinpricks in the sky. I drew in a deep breath, the scent of fallen leaves and damp earth grounding me. The envelopes had done their work. The whispers would grow louder. The walls they'd built around themselves were already crumbling. And yet I knew, this wasn't the end. Not yet. That was the thought I carried with me as I stepped into the cool night air, the silence of the hall still clinging to my skin. The stars were sharp above me, scattered like shards of glass, and the crisp autumn wind tugged at my dress. I breathed deeply, filling my lungs, steadying myself. The unmasking was done, but the ending wasn't written yet. I walked toward my truck, heels clicking softly on the pavement, each step echoing louder than the last. When I opened the door and slid inside, the leather seat creaked. My hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving. In the quiet, I whispered to myself, this time they can't laugh it away. And I knew I wasn't finished. The next morning the town buzzed. At the diner, whispers followed me like shadows. People leaned over their coffee cups, voices low but eager. Did you hear what happened last night? He showed them. The Johnsons are finished. The words swirled through the air, heavy with shock and fascination. I stirred my coffee slowly, pretending not to listen, but every sentence landed sharp in my ears. For years I had been the butt of their jokes. The one who settled, the one who married beneath her. Now the story was changing and I could feel the shift. By noon it wasn't whispers anymore. The local paper carried the headline, "Questions raised at Johnson Gala." Not accusations yet, not scandal, but the cracks had widened into daylight. And cracks once seen don't disappear. That afternoon I heard the knock. It wasn't polite. It was heavy, desperate, the kind that rattles the wood. I opened the door to find my parents standing there, their faces pale, their eyes rimmed with sleeplessness. My sister stood behind them, makeup smeared, her dress wrinkled, her smile gone. "We need to talk," my father said, his voice hoarse. I stepped aside slowly, the creak of the floorboards following their entrance. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I'd once been dismissed as foolish, mocked for choosing the life I had. Now they sat hunched, small, their eyes darting around like cornered animals. My mother was the first to speak. "We know what you did. The envelopes, the papers. It was you." I didn't deny it. I folded my hands on the table, waiting. "We're ruined," my sister said, her voice cracking. "Do you understand that? The banks, the donors, everyone's pulling away. We're drowning." My father leaned forward, his fists tight. "This isn't a game. We need your help. 20,000. Just enough to hold us until—" I held up a hand, cutting him off. My voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. "I told you before. My answer hasn't changed." The silence that followed was thick, pressing against my chest. But then I leaned forward, my voice lowering, every word deliberate. "What you don't understand is this. You thought you had power over me. You thought mocking me, laughing at me would keep me small. But I learned. I watched. I kept everything you left behind, everything you wanted hidden. And now the truth isn't mine alone. It's out there and you can't take it back." My sister's lip trembled. My mother's hands twisted in her lap. My father's face flushed, rage and fear battling in his eyes. "You'll regret this," he spat. "No," I said, my voice firm. "For once it won't be me who regrets." They left soon after, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. But this time I didn't flinch. I stood there, my hands still on the knob, listening to the fading crunch of their footsteps on the gravel. When silence returned, I closed the door slowly, deliberately, until the latch clicked into place. That sound, that final click, was more satisfying than any applause could have been. In the weeks that followed, everything crumbled. The paper printed more, digging into records I had quietly set in motion. The donors withdrew. Friends stopped calling. My parents' house went on the market, but no buyers came. My sister's phone calls turned shrill, then silent. At church, heads no longer turned toward me with pity. Some offered quiet nods, others whispered words of support. I didn't seek their approval, but I felt the weight shift all the same. The balance had changed. One afternoon, as I hung laundry on the line, a neighbor paused at the fence. Heard about what happened, she said softly. Took courage to do what you did. I smiled faintly, the sun warm on my back. It wasn't courage, I replied. It was just necessary. The final twist came quietly without ceremony. A letter arrived in the mail, not from my family but from the bank. My father had listed my name years ago, tucked away in a forgotten document when he thought he was being clever, using me as collateral without my knowledge. That oversight, his arrogance, now worked against him. The deed to a small piece of property, one they tried to leverage and hide, was legally mine. Their mistake. My inheritance, not through generosity but through carelessness. I held the papers in my hands, the weight of them heavy, final. This was the closure I hadn't expected, but the one that felt right. Not only had I exposed them, I now held a piece of what they had tried to keep from me. When my parents came one last time, their faces thinner, their clothes worn, I didn't invite them inside. They stood on the porch, my father trying to summon his old authority, my mother looking anywhere but my eyes. Please, my mother whispered. Just help us. I looked at them for a long moment, the air between us filled with all the years of laughter, of jeers, of dismissal. Then I shook my head slowly. No, I said softly. This door is closed. And with that I shut it. I leaned against the wood, my hand pressed flat against its grain. For the first time in years I felt light. Not giddy, not joyful, but free. The weight of their voices, their judgment, had finally lifted. Outside I heard their footsteps retreat, slower this time, heavier. They didn't knock again. I turned back to my kitchen, the evening sun pouring through the window, casting golden light across the floor. My husband sat at the table, his hands folded, his eyes steady on mine. It's done, I whispered. He nodded once, simply. It's done. I poured myself a cup of tea, the steam curling upward like a ribbon, and sat down across from him. For years I had been the one they laughed at. Now I was the one who had the last word, without raising my voice, without lowering myself to their cruelty. Revenge hadn't been about shouting or breaking. It had been about patience, silence, and letting the truth do what it always does. Rise. As the evening settled, I stepped onto the porch once more. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and purple, the air cool, the world quiet. I wrapped my arms around myself, feeling not small but steady. I closed my eyes, breathed in the scent of earth and leaves, and let it sink into me, the knowledge that I had taken back my dignity, my strength, and my peace. And when I opened my eyes, the stars were just beginning to appear, bright and endless above me. I whispered to no one but myself. They'll never laugh at me again. If this story hit your heart, don't miss the next one. Subscribe now for more dark, emotional revenge stories, because every betrayal deserves its ending.